Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Live Ultralight Podcast powered by Outdoor Vitals. Today, in this episode, I invite Tyler, VP of Ops here at Outdoor Vitals, to come in and talk through with me what you guys need to know before attempting the Uinta Highline Trail, or some big takeaways for anyone looking at high wilderness area trails, such as the Colorado Trail, John Muir, Wind Rivers, places like those. You're going to get a lot of value out of this. We track a lot of stats. We talk about a lot of stats in this, from average heart rates to miles per day, moving time, lots of things that can be very valuable to you when planning a trip like this. So that was a lot of fun to go through some of those things. We talked about how many miles it is, elevation gain, temperatures, how to plan, what terrain can be like, footwear, gear, what type of clothing we're bringing, what our base weights were, how much water we're carrying, all sorts of very, very helpful information to have when looking at a big effort, high elevation wilderness hike like this, which if this is not on your list to do, it should be. To get out into some wilderness, high elevation wilderness like this, it is probably my most favorite, happiest possible place to be. There's just nothing like it. I liken it to, transporting yourself to Alaska and experiencing some of the most remote, untouched, most beautiful country there is. But it's right here in the lower 48. So you should have this on your list. But again, this podcast was a lot of fun. We just went through everything that you need to know to hike the Uinta Highline Trail, the things that you need to know before you attempt it. So join me as I bring Tyler on right now and we dive into this conversation. Oh, and last thing before we start that conversation, we are running right now a giveaway on the podcast for reviews. So if you will go and write us a review for the podcast on whatever channel that you're listening to right now, or will accept reviews, that helps the podcast grow. But it also gets you entered into a giveaway for the CS40 Ultra backpack. It's an extremely high value pack at $370. So if you want to win a $370 backpack and be one of the first to get it in your hands, please go write us a review. You'll have until May 15th to write those reviews before we'll close it up and put everyone in to win that. So thank you so much. And we'll go ahead and roll that interview right now. I'm gonna list some stats, I guess, first, just to spur this conversation off of things that people should know about this trip. So first off, for us, we started this trail at noon on Monday, and we finished the trail at about 4 p.m. on Friday, I would guess, around mid-afternoon, maybe even 3 p.m. on Friday. So we were, what is that? It's not a full 5 days essentially of hiking. We cut off the front of Monday and the tail of Tuesday, finishing these up. And according to my watch, Tyler did a few extra miles because he did Kings Peak because he hadn't done that before. I did 108 miles tracked on my Garmin watch. And we're going to be referring to Garmin stats a lot. And if you didn't know, if you're a Live Ultralight member, you can get a Garmin watch. We really love the Instinct. I've got the Instinct 2 Solar. They may be coming out with a new one right now. I'm not sure. But they are very telling. And yes, the data is not always 100% accurate. And sometimes we get in little tussles, I guess you could say.
Our watches are constantly tracking different mileage. So then we're like, well, whose is the control? Or do we take the average? And it's just, what else are we going to talk about?
What else are you talking about day after day?
Yeah.
Brigham loves to laugh at us because we constantly are kind of bickering. For the most part, they're within like 5% of each other. I usually say that mine's more accurate because it's newer, but you can play around with settings too. So, if you wanted less accuracy, you could
mess with your settings like Tayson has.
Yeah, so there's things. I need to relook at my settings. We discovered that the other day in a slot canyon we were hiking in just the other day. My watch jumped up a full mile on his just out of nowhere. Or seemingly out of nowhere, and so now I need to go check my settings.
Well, Brigham really rolled his eyes at us on that one because you were tracking.
Himself.
Yeah, the first day you were tracking in hiking mode and I was tracking in trail running mode. And we were off like a mile, which was a lot. So then we're like, oh, we better get on the same mode. So the next morning we both start our watches and I'm like, oh, I'm going to switch to the same mode that Tayson's on. So I switched to hiking mode. Tayson switches to trail running mode. And then the whole day we're still off because we didn't just talk about it.
And we didn't even start them at the same. Neither of us started them in camp. So
yeah. So, but the reason we track it is because we feel like there's a lot that we can learn about ourselves and about the areas that we're in by
takeaways,
by tracking and reviewing it. So we're going to talk about some of that stuff today.
Yeah, I mean, we track mileage, we track elevation, we track movement time, we track heart rates, all these things.
We track calories and these to know how much food we need.
Yeah, and these are critical things in my opinion. In fact, I was sitting down with Allied Feather in Germany talking about some of the stuff, talking about like how I track my heart rate when I go into elevation and how like I track what the resting rate is and and I compare data and he's like, dude, you're the perfect person to test this specific insulation out because it's got these claimed benefits. And there's, I guess the takeaway from that though is like when you're tracking these kind of data, you have opportunities to learn and then you can test other things out and have a baseline and a historic date range to look at. So some of this we do because we just enjoy it personally. Mm-hmm. Some of it we do from a realistic standpoint of improving gear. Because let's say you get you sleep terribly, and your watch tracks that. You get either a poor sleep quality on the watch, or you get bad heart rate. You never get into deeper cycles of sleeping. Well, you can look at that kind of stuff and potentially say, okay, what was wrong with my campsite selection? What was wrong with my sleeping pad? Was it too hard? Was it too soft? Was I not warm enough? There's all these factors, and so data is always a great place to start off the conversation. So coming back to this. I tracked 108 miles over the 4.5, almost 5 days of hiking. We did 16,217 vertical feet of climbing in those days. And we never, according to my watch, actually on day one, I think the trailhead maybe we dipped below this for just like literally 20 feet under 10,000 feet. For half a second on day one. Other than that, we were over 10,000 feet in elevation every single day, all day long until day 5. Yep. And
this is us doing the trail backwards
compared to what backwards.
Yeah, compared to what most people do. Most people start on the east end and they go west. And we did that the first year. The second year that we went up there, we wanted to do it going the other direction because we hadn't seen that part, and we wanted to kind of play the storms a little. So we can get into that a little more, but just for context, this is us going from the west end east, which is us starting high.
Let's debate that. Why would you start one way or the other? Because I think in our minds when we did it, we decided to do it backwards for 2 reasons. One, we'd already seen the other part of the trail, and so we wanted to make sure we finished the section we hadn't finished. So starting on the west side allowed us to get those miles done first in case something happened. So that was kind of the first reason I think we looked at it. But the case in point why I think most people do it the other direction is that you start at lower elevation and you build to the highest elevation. In reality, you're still high. It's not a lot of time to adapt if you do it the other way, meaning – let's say you even slept at the trailhead, which a lot of people will do. Mm-hmm. That trailhead on that end, it is lower. I'm still going to say it's 8,000 or more feet.
I think it's like 8,600 feet.
I can find it really fast, but it's still very, very high. And then basically by the end of that day, you're already up at 10,000 plus feet. So no. Yeah. You're getting close to that. So there is like one buffer day
depending on how fast you're going. So I will say, as far as a backpacking trip, we did this very fast compared to what most people do. And so if you're planning on this being a 7 or 8 day trip, which is kind of the average for hiking the Highline, that might give you 2 days to get to 10,000 feet.
Yeah. So our camp was our like end of the first day of actual hiking was over 10,000 feet for sure. And the trailhead that you start at, like if you went there to start the trail, which this is a pretty good strategy. It's always a smart thing to camp at the trailhead whenever possible. It's looking like, I'm just going to estimate that at about 8,000 to 8,200 feet. So you do get, that's a good thing to do. If you can sleep there that night, that I say would be worthwhile.
Yeah.
But then by the end of day one, if you get through the big water section, so there's a 20-mile dry section on the east side of the trail.
You go like 4 miles in from the trailhead on the east side.
The longest miles ever.
4 terrible miles. They're super rocky. And then from that last little spring, you have a 20-mile dry section. So most people are camping in the middle of that dry section where there's no water to filter.
Which is why last year on day one, we did like 25 miles on the first day so that we could get through that dry section completely and camp at water.
25 miles on day one with no water is probably not great for acclimation.
Yeah,
but
it really wasn't. We dropped a person essentially on day one of last year that didn't acclimate well enough, maybe had some other things going on. But either way, it is physically demanding on you. So in that sense of the word, I don't know if that was a better way to do it or not if you're going to do it the way we did it. If you're going to hike the first 5 or 6 miles and camp at that water and then do the 20-mile section in one day that's all dry, then that's probably a pretty good strategy. Otherwise, I don't really see any benefit to starting on the east or west end for acclimation. In fact, if you start on the west side, at least you have water the whole day, and it's just kind of, I don't know, like that's the biggest thing that we stress so much is water. In fact, I think it was in our Highline documentary, which is out right now. You probably hear me in there asking Joe, like, are you staying hydrated? Are you staying hydrated? Mm-hmm. I probably asked him, he was a good sport. Like he never called me back out on it, but I bet between me and others, we asked him how hydrated he was every hour of that day because we know Joe has the least amount of experience in the high country, and we like that is the single biggest factor to staying out of elevation sickness profile is stress on the body. But number one, other than that, is just water. Like if you are staying hydrated, it allows your heart to pump less. It allows you to keep your heart rate lower. Like you can look at data. For those of you who didn't know this, you can look at data and certain people, if they have enough data, can tell you when you're dehydrated or hydrated just based on your heart rate. Mm-hmm. Because if you're dehydrated, your heart has to pump harder and faster to circulate your blood and get everything to where it needs to go, versus if you're hydrated, it allows you to have a lower resting heart rate. So we stress that very heavily because one of the single biggest things that we found is that by having a high heart rate, it's a very good either leading or lagging indicator that you're at high risk of elevation sickness or negative effects from being at elevation. So,
yeah, and with elevation sickness, like part of the reason we pay attention to hydration or any little symptom that someone might be dealing with is because what we found is it doesn't really matter what your first ailment is. It's if you're at high elevation, it's probably going to end as elevation sickness. Like it's going to lead to that because essentially any little nick in your armor makes you liable for elevation sickness is kind of what we found in our experience. So you start to lose your appetite, you might be headed down the road towards elevation sickness. You start to get dehydrated, you're headed down that road. If you have any issues.
So I want to talk more about the heart rate stuff in a bit, but back to just which direction should you do the trail. I will say this. If you're looking at it unless you do it very strategically where you hike the first 5 miles, like on the first day or like maybe a half day and then you camp at water, I see no elevation advantage really because there's just not. Like hiking 20 miles with no water versus just starting at elevation, not especially when at the end of both days you're at 10,000 plus feet. But what I will say is if you're going to do the full Highline, like highway to highway, it is way more scenic and like has a better climatic ending if you go from east to west. It was very anticlimactic for us to have the last day of Highline be the most treed in, less scenic, less beautiful per se hike of it when you're like trying to get off trail versus like day one was spectacular and we were just in it for 4 days straight and then yeah. So from a scenic standpoint and whatnot, I would recommend starting east to west. But from an altitude standpoint, I don't see a huge advantage unless you're
going slower.
Yeah.
If you're going to make it a 7 or more day trip, you can probably get some acclimation helping if you're going that way. Totally. The other thing I would say is that section between the east terminus and Chipeta Lake is like the least exciting section of the whole trail. So it is.
I would say the Leidy Peak.
Yeah.
As soon as you get past Leidy Peak, it's beautiful.
Yeah. So if you're limited on time and you want to get the Highline experience and you're not worried about being able to say you did all 100 miles of the Uinta Highline, starting at Chipeta Lake or Leidy Peak is a good option. You start there on the east end and then work your way westward, and that shortens your trip.
I think it's like 67-ish miles from Chipeta and somewhere in the high 80s or mid-80s if you start from Leidy Peak. Mm-hmm. So both of those, you basically cut out at least one full day, if not more, of hiking, depending on which place you start.
So that's an option.
Like I honestly don't know that I would do the full 108 miles again. If I was going to do it, I'd probably personally start at Leidy Peak and do that again. You cut out an extra day, but then you're just in that beautiful country you went there to begin with. You're in that the whole time. So,
but that's because now we're proud that we can say we did the
I've
entire
already got that
mountain
merit
range.
Badge.
Yep.
Been there.
Yep.
Done
Did that entire range.
Yep.
Which is cool.
And
to
I've
say.
hiked that section twice now.
Yep.
The drier lower section. So, good aspects there to cover. So I guess other things that we really want to talk about. I want to talk about weather and temperatures. I want to talk about water carries, trail conditions. So maybe just
let's
on
go to
trail.
weather.
Okay, weather.
So weather is one of the reasons that we started on the west end for this last time that we did it, because the first time we attempted Highline, we got snowed out at Anderson Pass and Kings Peak, which is the highest point on the trail.
This is
it's
like
over
August,
13,000 feet.
August 15th through the 18th or something is like the days we're on trail getting snowed out.
It just so happened that Utah was getting record rainfall and massive flooding all over the state that week that we were in the highest mountains in Utah, which is not good timing.
Yeah, that's where we learned that the trails in the Uintas are not trails, they're dry riverbeds, and then when it rains, they're just riverbeds.
Rocky
and that's why they're so rocky. They are.
Yeah. So we had that rough experience in 2021, and so going into 2022, we were watching the weather like crazy, and we were seeing that there was an opportunity for some thunderstorms and rain on day 2 and like for sure on day 3 of our trip. And so our strategy was to start on the west side and get past Kings Peak and Anderson Pass before the storms hit the mountain range. That was one reason that we chose to go that direction.
Yeah, we definitely weren't we were expecting rain. We were hopeful it didn't turn into snow. And we had not yet done those passes, so we weren't sure how sketchy they were or whatnot in those type of conditions. And having said that now, I think that was very smart. When we got off the trail last year, there's no doubt in my mind that was a very wise decision, because there are a few passes that we would have had to continue to go through that were way sketchy and would have been I would have been very nervous leading a team through those passes. You know, you're talking about Dead Horse Pass, even the backside of Anderson.
Or even that backside of Red Knob where it's like the kind of a northeast face.
Yeah, that one. Would be was it Porcupine even? Like it's a small pass, but you're just on this little game trail going sideways across it. So it was very nice for us. You know, so if you're going and there may be snow, that may be another consideration, because it's going to be safer to be not doing the highest, most treacherous passes during that time. Now, I'm not sure if this will be out yet or not, but we did film 360 degree camera footage of every pass. And we're going to push that out as a video. So if you want to like skip through probably an hour's worth of video of just walking through some of the most beautiful passes, beautiful country. But if you just want to get an idea of what a pass looks like, you can also find that. That'll be over on Outdoor Vitals YouTube channel. I'm not sure exactly when that'll go out, but probably similar to when the time of this recording is going to go out.
And on YouTube, you should be able to click on the screen of the video and scroll yourself to whatever angle of the pass you want to see. So you can scroll it 360 degrees to see what you want to see.
Yeah, if you want to be looking behind me while I'm walking forward, you just grab the screen and scroll it. It's a pretty cool technology. That's the hope yet. It's not out yet. So let's cross our fingers that we have no technical issues getting it up and running. But I think that's a part of the strategy. But speaking of weather, so we were expecting that weather. We're trying to get through all the high passes, or at least the passes we didn't know anything about. Because even if we had to go over North Pole Pass, aka Polar Bear Pass, we knew that wasn't a scary pass for slipping and falling per se, or not as bad.
Right.
We'd been there, seen that stuff before. So talk to me a little bit about what kind of weather conditions people could expect in August on this trail. What's the highs? What's the lows?
I would expect everything. Like
Exactly.
I'm serious.
Exactly.
Like when you're going into the high mountains, like I would say, I consider anything over, essentially like 8,500 feet or above tree level as high mountains. You're going to be very exposed to the sun, so it's going to feel extra hot. You're going to be liable for some serious sunburns if you're not prepared for that. You should have seen Brigham's legs by the time we got done with Highline last time. That was
Mine
rough.
would have been terrible, but I had some leg sleeves on, some compression socks that I was very happy for.
So I would be prepared for heat and high sun and wind exposure. I would also be prepared for rain and snow. Like literally anytime we've gone up above tree line and there's a 10% forecast of rain, you are pretty much guaranteed you're going to see some lightning and some rain. Like if there's any chance of it, it's you're just so exposed that you're going to get it. So
yeah, I think that's a good rule of thumb, just for sure. If there's any forecast of it, expect it. If you don't get it, like count your blessings, because that's not common. It's more common to get the weather. We were seeing, I think we were getting up into the mid to high 60s. I don't know if we touched 70s in like the hottest part of the day, but doesn't tell the whole picture, because you are more exposed to the sun when you're above tree line. Obviously, you're exposed, and I don't know if this is scientific or not, but I believe it is. But there's like less atmosphere, so you're at a higher risk of sun burning at those higher elevations.
Like the UV rating would be higher for the exposure there. Along with that, you are definitely more exposed to the wind, and you will get wind burn on top of sunburn, and so it's just rough on your skin that way. You got to protect yourself.
So something like the altitude sun hoodie is perfect. I mean, that's why we called it the altitude sun hoodie, is because when we're going to elevation, you want a long sleeve on, you want a hood. It's feather light, so yeah, you can wet it out if you need to, or any breeze blows straight through that thing. But it's way easier to do that than to put on sunscreen constantly and pack sunscreen. Yes, like our faces are still exposed and we have to carry maybe a little face stick, but that's way less than like Joe in one point in the video. I was kind of making fun of him, saying like my sun hoodie never runs out of sunscreen, because he was just lathering up with sunscreen. So it is a very nice tool for those conditions. What about lows?
So lows, you're going to see higher swings in temperature than you're used to camping lower than that. So we were getting 70s in the day when we were there last August, and the lows, I believe, were in the low 40s, high 30s.
Yeah, I have a new temperature sensor that I've been taking on trips now, which is pretty dang helpful. But my estimation was that we were getting into mid to low 30s on the coldest nights on the last trip. But the year prior, on the same date ranges, we were in the 20s. I mean, it was snowing.
We woke up with 4 or 5 inches of snow that last morning.
Yeah. But the other part that doesn't tell the whole picture is when you go into high country like this, especially, July and August, there's still usually a lot of water around. You're typically, your campsites are close to water. Like, I don't know, just maybe it's the way that we've done it, but a lot of times there's a lot of water in the ground, which gives you a high humidity, number or whatnot. And so even though it's, say, mid-30s, it can feel colder. It really can. And because there's usually a little bit more airflow because you're high, a little bit more airflow mixed with water in the ground. And I mean, that's like every campsite we went to there. Like, you're close to water, or there's just like if you were to look at the soil, you can tell it just looks and feels damp because water's not very far. It's not very deep into the soil. So it doesn't tell the whole picture. So usually it may be mid-30s, but it can feel colder, which is why I think we both took 15-degree rated bags. Mm-hmm. Yes, that gives us a buffer. Like, you could bring a 30-degree bag, but the reason that buffer felt necessary for us is the year prior when it snowed, it was in the 20s, and
we were
you're getting
soaking
in
wet.
Yeah, you're getting into your sleeping bag wet. So having that little bit of buffer room for the couple ounces of difference between a 30 and a 15-degree bag was really nice to help dry out gear and to be prepared for if those temperatures drop. Could you do this with a 30-degree bag? I think for sure. 30-degree top coat, especially from us, I'd feel confident you'd be fine in it. But
Brigham did it, right?
Yeah, he did. But I would just be weary of making sure you've got layers, that you're keeping sleeping clothes dry, those types of things. So, just expect it all. The temperatures can just swing so drastically from, say, 70 degrees in the day to 20 degrees at night. You just never know what kind of weather can be coming in, and at that elevation, it's just big swings. Okay, let's talk for a second because I do want to get into like gear and clothing. Let's talk for a second about trail conditions and water carries before we get into gear and some of the other stats that I've tracked that I think are kind of interesting. So let's talk about trail conditions. We've talked about this before that, like, just like I mentioned, like, because of the water constantly eroding the dirt off of the trails, because these things feel like they're dry riverbeds more than trails half the time, it's extremely rocky. And I'm not saying it's all kinds. It's big boulders, it's small round rocks that just wear your feet out. There's sections where you're just stepping from one rock to another rock to another rock, and they're all uneven, they're all jagged, they're all sharp. So with the trail runner, it really starts to fatigue your foot because in a boot, you've got a stiffer sole. And so you don't feel as much of that over time. In a trail runner, you will feel it. And if you're Tyler and you had a specific trail runner, you extra feel it because you didn't even have on the bottom of
My main mistake with that was I went and did that trail last time on the pair of trail runners that I'd used all summer to train for the Highline. So I already had 300 plus miles on those shoes before we started. And, depending on the brand of shoe and the recommendation, you're supposed to be retiring your shoes at that mileage level. And I just didn't think too much of it, and I paid for it in the end. Because,
well, you're thinking I'm not running probably. I'm just hiking.
Yeah, but miles are miles, and those miles are ridiculously jagged. So, yeah, my feet were really feeling it by even by day 4. I was getting pretty tender-footed. I wasn't getting blisters or anything like that because I was conditioned, fairly well and used to those shoes. But I was just getting tender. Yeah.
I think all of us were getting tender, but Tyler seemed to be feeling it more. And I would say just some takeaways from that would be you were running the Ultra Olympus
4, yeah.
And on the bottom of that, if you were to typically look at the bottom of a trail runner, they'll have a harder rubberized sole. It's thin, but it's there, and then they've got all the foam. On his particular shoe, that rubberized sole is mainly around the outside, so the inner section of that shoe didn't have that. And so there was one point I don't remember if it was that trail or a different trail. I mean, I've watched a stick poke through the bottom of all of the foam and into your shoe.
Yeah,
it was pretty intense. And
a 3/4 inch long.
Yeah,
jagged thorn.
Because of that, nothing against Ultras. I actually just recently picked up a pair, even though I've been kind of not liking ultras for a handful of years. I recently picked up a pair again to try them out, and there's some things I like about them. But to be noted, you do want at least the harder rubberized, grippy part of the shoe, a full bottom on it. Helped us more than it helped him. Even though his was our higher cushion, more foam, he could still get like a sharp poke better than I could say in the Solomons I was running for that trip.
Yeah, it's I think the Lone Peaks, which is like the next tier down in cushion, they have a full Vibram sole, and those would have been just fine.
Yeah,
but
learning lessons.
Yep, learning lessons. We did discuss on trail if we would have traded our trail runners for some lightweight mids, some mid-height hiking boots, and I think if I were to do it again, I probably would.
I think if you had the right mid, and we're talking like trail runner with barely a little top on it type of mid, not like don't think like a full on boot, like a Merrill Moab, or I've got a Solomon. Oh crap, what are they? Cross something. You have a Hoka that's just.
I have the Hoka Kaha Sky, which is a super light.
They're like more of a trail runner with a boot upper than anything else, but they are just a hair stiffer.
Yeah.
But they're just not like you wouldn't want to throw on a heavy pair of boots because you're going 100 miles and we were doing it fast. So that may be preferred. It may be preferred. Sitting here back in this chair, I'm like, I don't know. I might just stick to the trail runners. But in the moment, by the end of the trail, I think we would have swapped them out. Like day one, we wouldn't have, but by day 5, we probably would have.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's helpful at all. But
yeah, I think it's something to consider. Like, we're not fans of big, heavy boots.
No,
they don't do you any. Even if they're stiff and they protect your feet and your ankles, they're kind of a crutch because if they're stabilizing your ankle so much that your ankle doesn't get stronger when you're training and hiking, then that's not great. But then too, we subscribe to that belief, which I think we need to do some like lab testing to really figure out the difference. But we subscribe to the belief that a pound on your feet is equal to like 10 extra pounds on your back. So it's really fatiguing to have too big of a boot.
It really is. I love to give the example of if anyone's like ridden a road bike versus a trail bike. I remember specifically I had more of a like this mountain bike that came with like mud tires on it. And I remember I was almost only doing city riding on this bike, and so I eventually switched it to a more narrow tire. And I felt 50% more efficient, like just instantly. And I didn't even have like the super skinny road tires. I'm talking just
slick,
same rim, just a slick tire.
Yeah.
It's massive, but give it a shot. You will notice a difference if you can shave weight off of your feet. But just know, going into this, it's rocky. You may want to consider things for foot protection, and mainly you want to train on uneven terrain so that your ankles and feet and all of that can get used to having its own stability in there. You're not going to roll an ankle on day one. You want to build that up, and you want to have it strong enough that by the end of day 5, you're not so fatigued that then you're going to roll your ankles. So just be prepared for that when training for this kind of stuff. That you don't want to be just walking in the city or climbing up just stairs, right? You want to get off on uneven terrain.
I would say trekking poles too are pretty critical for how rocky that terrain is and how steep and gnarly some of those passes are. I know a lot of people don't love to hike with trekking poles because it feels awkward or it's extra money and weight, But when you get up in the high country and you get that far into the back country where no one's getting back to you to help you very easy, trekking poles saved us all from falls at different points, either because we were standing on loose, rolly, softball-sized rocks or because we're getting tired or what. But it's that's something to consider.
I mean, if you look at it, our stance on that is, I would say, just very strong. Whether it's Highline or other ones, we have a very strong stance on use trekking poles. We build trekking pole shelters because to us, everyone should have trekking poles. It's something we have a pretty hard stance on. So yeah, totally agree with that. We kind of touched on this already with water carry, so I don't know if we have much more. Obviously, the longest water carry is about 20 miles. It might be 18 or 19, but it feels long. It's dry. It's rough terrain. But other than that, there is water aplenty. So really the only consideration I would have there is filtering efficiency. So, there's a lot of people, let's say if you're out on the AT, that may carry literally 1 liter of water or max 2 liters of water. For us, especially with the bigger group size, we still were getting up to 3 liters of water at time in water carries. But a lot of that has to do, if you're going to stop the entire group and filter water, it's just more efficient to filter it all there and then avoid a stop, because getting 4 to 5, or we have 6, I don't know, however many people on the trail started and stopped takes extra time each day, which I'm going to talk about here in a second, just some of our moving speeds and times. But for the most part, water is pretty abundant. It's pretty easy to plan, pretty easy to see on a map, and I wouldn't worry too much about that. But really, just make sure you've got enough water for the big water carry. And I would say we do have some opinions on this. When we did the big water carry, I think we were all trying to carry about 4 liters of water. But we saw other people in that big water carry literally carrying 4 liters on their back and 2 liters in each hand, and doing some crazy things. Our stance on that my stance on that would be, you need water, yes, based on output, but you also need water based on time between getting through it. So if I was going to hypothetically try to camp in that dry section, I'm going to have to carry more water. If I'm going to take 16 hours to get through that dry section, I'm going to need more water. But if you have the ability to say, all right, this is 20 miles and I'm going to push through it quite quickly, you don't have to carry as much water, because you may be only in that 20 miles for 6 or 8 hours. And maybe that's I don't know, I'm just kind of throwing numbers out there, but keep in mind that the length of duration that you take between water stops also contributes to the amount of water you need to carry. So for us, 4 liters to go that distance was adequate. We were mainly going downhill too, so that's a slight other factor. But we see people, I think some people carry way too much water in those sections. Sometimes they carry and some people are way too trusting that I only need 2 liters. I only ever need 2 liters, right? Have the ability to adjust up and down, but keep in mind that if you are able to move through those sections quicker, that means you need to carry a little bit less water.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just to do the research before you get out there and know how much water you need per mile or per hour, essentially. We've got videos about doing sweat tests and stuff like that. If you get that kind of stuff figured out before, you can take the guesswork out of it when you're there.
And even if it becomes overwhelming to be like, I sweat this much per hour, and what about these conditions and all that, I wouldn't get so hung up on that. Just the more data you begin to collect on yourself, it's just more experience that you're utilizing to just apply and fill in gaps and stuff. So it's not like when I looked at this 20-mile section, I was saying, all right, this many miles, this many hours, this many this. It's just an overall collection of having data points and having good ideas of how much water I need. So I don't get too overwhelmed, but collect the data. Do as much beforehand as you can, because that just helps you have a better experience out there. So
this is a serious enough hike. You need to prepare. You
need to plan it.
Yeah, it's not one that you just plan with your buddies and say, okay, we're going in 3 months to do this, and then you don't look at your gear and you don't do any exercise or preparation until the week before you go. That's a major opportunity for failure if you're not exercising, you're not dialing in your gear, you're not planning.
Couldn't agree more. All right, let's talk next about some more statistics, and then we'll get into clothing choices and gear choices. So some statistics that I thought were pretty interesting. Day 1, we did 18 and a half miles. Day 2, 22, 22, 24, and 20, 21. But what's interesting is, if I didn't show you this, which I don't know if you've already been really analyzing this over my shoulder here, and you're thinking about how much time we're like from the time we start in the morning to the time that we get to camp at night, how much of that time do you think that we're actually moving, whether that's a percentage or in hours, whichever's easier for you?
I haven't thought about that too much. Like our typical routine is to get up around sunup, start packing up, moving, have breakfast, which is a 40-minute break, go 2 hours, have a break, go 2 hours, have lunch, go 2 hours, have a break, go 2 hours, have dinner, and then go 2 more hours before we set up camp. Right?
Yeah. I'm just trying to think in my head how that adds up, right? Like
so,
5.
our breaks are always longer than we want, like as far as what we plan, but we also really enjoy getting some food, laying down, take our shoes off, like take some photos, look at how pretty everything is everywhere. So I would say our actual moving time is probably 8 or 9 hours.
Okay.
But like our time on trail is more like all of the daylight hours, so that's like 14 hours.
So 2 of the days have similar stats in the middle of the trip where we were about 12 to 12 and a half elapsed time hours from the time that I started my watch to the time I stopped it.
That makes sense.
So on those days, those are 22-mile days, each 22 and a 24-mile day. How much of the time do you think we were moving versus stopped, or how much time do you think we stopped? That might be easier.
I'm going to say 9 hours of moving time.
9 hours moving time. So I felt kind of the same as you. When I actually pulled this stat off of the watch, it shocked me.
Yeah.
And this stat I would say is probably one of the least accurate of the stats because it basically just triggers if it feels like you're moving,
if
and then it tries to guess
from your
when you
lunch
started
spot to the water spot.
Yeah, it could track that, etc. But what I saw is that on average, from elapsed time to not, we were moving only 63% of the time.
Oh, wow.
And that meant on those 12-hour days, we averaged between 7.5 and 8 hours and 15 minutes of move time. So you overestimated by, we'll just call it an hour.
Yeah.
Which was probably that's not bad. But that kind of shocked me when I was like, whoa, we stopped that much? We stopped that. Like, that seems like a lot of stopping, and it seems like we're moving very efficiently. But obviously we have the bigger the group, the more stops you have. One person has to use the restroom. One person runs out of water because they didn't filter enough. One person needs this, and the whole group has to stop. And then when it's, okay, well, it's time to go, everyone packs up. Well, if one person packed up slower, it slows the whole group down. So all those things add up to 30-plus minutes a day, I would say, with a group of 5. Just the extra time. But it's really interesting. 63% of the time we're moving from the time we break camp to the time we stop to set up camp. Only 63% of the time. While we're moving, every single day, like clockwork, our average pace of moving time was 20-minute miles. In other words, 3 miles an hour. So we were moving at 3 miles an hour on average all the time. We did have some fast sections where we were doing 4-minute miles and 5-minute miles, which sometimes I can't trust like the fastest moving pace because it may be a gap in tracking and then it like jumps you forward or something. But I can confidently say that we were going 4 miles an hour multiple times almost every day, which is pretty interesting. So usually coming down the backside of passes, sometimes we'd push a little bit faster or just little things like that. We definitely don't do that much. We just seem to be very consistently between 18 and 22-minute miles, which averages us at 20-minute miles. So which that all plays in. For the mileage, you look at that, move time, that's how much time we needed to accomplish those miles. Pretty dang interesting. 2 of the days we had 20.5-minute mile average, but I mean, you're talking about a 30-second difference day over day. So very consistent on our move speed, which I thought was pretty dang interesting. But yeah, really shocked me because I feel like we're fairly efficient. But yeah, only 63% of the time from camp to camp we were there. On our best day, which was our last day of the trip, which this one made sense to me, basically 74% of the time we were moving. So we were very efficient that day. 9 hours, 25 minutes of elapsed time, with basically 7 hours of that being moving time. So we took very few breaks on that day, which makes sense because we all wanted to finish it.
Meal.
We had one less meal.
We saw less people.
And we wanted to get done. Yeah.
We filmed less because it's less scenic.
Yeah, some of these, like, it made sense too. We had some lower percentages, like day 2. That was the day we had to stop. We were going slower, with Joe, but then also we had to stop and have a conversation. Spent an hour at least in that conversation, getting the Garmin inReach synced up to his phone and everything verified there. So there was more break time on there.
Day 3, we ran into just a lot more people because they were doing kind of the standard Kings Peak hike. So we were talking to people a lot.
Lots of people stopping us, talking to us about Outdoor Vitals, watch videos, etc. But I think this is the important part. Everyone, including me, I do this every day in my life. I overestimate what I can do that day. Every day in my life, I overestimate what I can do. And I can tell you already, we're going to get comments on YouTube saying, dude, I'm like 80% of it. Like, I'm moving 80% of the time. I know that I am, and this and this and this. And, I would just say a lot of you are also overestimating. But until you get hard stats in front of you, take it easy on the keyboard because you're probably perpetuating misinformation. Take this with a grain of salt to know exactly what is reality. And you're talking about a group of guys that are all fit, all training, all running, 20 miles a week or more, like done this year over year. We know what we're doing. I'm not saying we're the best. I'm not saying we're the top percentage or anything. I'm just saying, like, this is a really interesting stat to apply to yourself because if you're lower than our fitness level, you may be taking more breaks. And most people overestimate what they can do. Most people just think, if I move at 3 miles an hour on average and this and this and this, well, 3 miles an hour is harder to hold than you think. And it doesn't take much to start to derail that and so on and so forth. But it is possible. We did it. But again, we're guys coming in with 10 to 12 pound base weights, doing a lot of training and a lot of prep work. So it's cool stats, something cool to know.
I'm really not mad about that 65%. For one, we still got 20 to 25 miles a day. We did it in the time that we wanted. But also, I feel like we enjoyed ourselves. Like a lot of people, I think, look at the pace that we went at and thought like, oh, well, if you're moving sun up to sundown, like what's the fun in that? And for us,
that's
what it comes down to is we have the fun on the trail, not in camp, right?
Exactly.
Like for me, there's no reason to rush to camp if you're just going to sit around at camp. Like I would rather just see more. We have our meals in beautiful scenic places where we can
including
look
dinner.
Off for hundreds of miles. Yeah, we do dinner right at 5:00 and we do miles after dinner because we have more energy to do those last miles and because we get a hike during the prettiest time of the day, So I feel like it's a little bit of a mind shift to think like, okay, well, let's spend our non-moving time out on the trail rather than in camp. Like what if you're trying to leave a small trace or no trace, essentially, when you're camping, there really isn't much reason to hang out in camp for hours.
Yeah. When I look at the 3 days in the middle where we weren't getting on trail or getting off trail, we were averaging 5 hours of break time during the day, which is pretty dang good to think that we were just out enjoying eating, filtering some water, looking at stuff, whatever we were choosing to do. We weren't moving for 5 hours of the day, but we were still getting 22 to 24 miles in. So
a lot of that's just filtering water time.
I hate that. Yeah. Which, by the way, we have a new water filter in our membership exclusive. So if you're a Live Ultralight member, we obviously sell retail gear and food products. We do that so that we can give it to you at the best possible price. If we don't gate it, we have to follow what's called MSRP or MAP pricing, and list it the same price as everyone else. But inside the membership, we can drop the price of that by another 10%, and we can also give you rebates back. So it's the cheapest place to buy water filters or food, especially like those reoccurring type of things. You can save big over the year.
Not only do you get discounts, you get rebates.
Yes. You'll get money back when you buy through that. So the new water filter is the Platypus Quick Draw. I tested this product for a full year using a single water filter on every single one of my trips, and it was phenomenal.
And
in
I
fact,
used
I
2 or
just
3
retired
Be
it.
Frees in
Yeah,
that time.
he may have used 2 or 3 Be Frees. Not that we hate the Be Free, but it just seems like the longevity and the ability to back flush this platypus quick draw is really, really important. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know how many days I spent out on trail, but it was significant, obviously. And that filter is still going. In fact, I just decided to retire it on our last trip because we were filtering some pretty muddy water, and it was pretty disgusting. Not disgusting. It was pretty. I was disgusted with the amount of time it took compared to Tyler and Brigham had brand new quick draws, and they were like, boom, boom, 2 liters. And I'm like, I'm half a liter in right now. But, obviously I think I, in my head, retired it last year, so I probably didn't really clean it out before this trip or before I retired it for kind of the winter months. But it's a phenomenal filter. You can go snag that inside the Live Ultralight membership. For those of you who don't know, that's a $10 a month membership that instantly that $10 gets loaded into store credit. So really you're just transferring $10 into your Outdoor Vitals savings account. And then you get all the benefits of 10% off year-round, exclusives like these where you get rebates and discounted prices and a whole lot more. So go check that out. Back to this, though. Filtering water it just sucks, especially when you got 5 people filtering water. It just takes time, and I just wish that sometimes I was someone who had Giardia and was just willing to drink whatever water I come across. Yep. Maybe I just need to experiment with Aquatabs sometimes a little bit more. But just some things to note there. Okay, let's get into the last stat and then clothing. So the last stat I wanted to share with you guys is heart rate. Specifically what I track when I go to elevation is my sleeping, resting heart rate. So what did my heart rate get to while I was sleeping? Now, when I'm at home in my own bed, in fact, I'll pull it up for last night, just for reference. I'm typically in the 40s, low 40s a lot of times. So my heart rate last night looks like it was 47. But a lot of times I'm sitting at, say, 44. That's probably my most common number. Is 44 resting heart rate while I sleep. When I go to elevation, that's not what I'm getting. Day 1, I was at 67. Now, for going into 10,000 feet terrain, that's actually quite common for me as the first night. A lot of times I'm even in low 70 ranges. So that was not concerning to me at all. I was like, okay, solid, right where I need to be based off of my historic information. Night number 2, I was at 66 on the resting. But I was in the 70s almost all night. I dipped for just a second right before I woke up into the 66.
And that night was about 1,000 feet higher.
Yeah, it's a little bit higher. So there's kind of 2 things working against me there. But what I can learn from that, and I knew in the moment, was we camped at a spot where we didn't know there was water like 200 yards ahead because that was our latest camp we set up. Mm-hmm. And I was running low on water, and I was getting just the slightest a bit dehydrated per se. Because what I typically like to do, especially at elevation, I'm very adamant that throughout the night, if I wake up to roll over, I grab a sip of water. I try to get rehydrated during the night. Well, that night, I didn't have to get up to go to the bathroom, and I could just tell that I was getting behind. So when I woke up that next morning, there were some concerns I was starting to develop, just like, oh man, I didn't drink as much as I wanted. But my resting heart rate still dipped right at the end to 66. And because I'm not really checking my phone statistics out there, I'm really just checking my resting end number. I didn't know that for most of the night I was in the 70s or even 80s. So then I get to night number 3, my resting was 75. Now, night number 3 was after the day where I started to not feel good. The tail end of that day, I started to lose my appetite. I started to feel very nauseous when we were climbing up North Pole Pass.
We had the 2 highest, biggest passes in that day. So we did Anderson Pass first thing in the morning and then North Pole Pass right before we camped. So it was just a massive day of effort. Our biggest miles, highest elevation.
Yeah, big day of effort, highest elevation, and right before dinner that night, I started to feel sick. We went to climb up Polar Bear Pass, North Pole Pass. I was feeling very sick, very sick. Got to the top, leveled off, felt okay, got to camp, did my best to rehydrate and eat. Did okay just forcing things in, but my resting heart rate that night was 75. And I don't think that was because of the lightning. I think I calmed down after the lightning.
I noticed that mine was up during that lightning storm.
Yeah, during the lightning, I'm sure I was like at 100 beats per minute.
Yeah.
But that was, again, an indicator that, hey, maybe not everything is good. So that next day was kind of rough for me. Anytime we were going up passes, I was feeling that exertion, and I did not, throughout the whole day, have as much of an appetite. But we did sleep at a slightly lower elevation, probably 9,500 feet or something that night. And the next night, my resting heart rate dropped into the 50s again. So you can use statistics like this for your advantage by having something like the Garmin, which is available in the membership. It is beneficial, and it can really tell you, hey, if you've got things to worry about, it can help you build a database. Because what I would have expected was first night about 70 resting, next night about 60 resting, and then if I'm staying that high, I get into the 50s, but I stay in the 50s. I don't get into the 40s when I'm that high. My resting heart rate never is that low. So just some things to note. And they can help you realize, if you have a night where all of a sudden you're at 75 and you get up and check that, hey, maybe you need to take it easier that day. Or maybe you need to just stop and hydrate more frequently. Maybe you need to get a few more calories in, and just recognize that you might be coming up on something that's not going to be good on the other side of that. So it's good data to have.
I think when you listen to us talk about this kind of stuff, you may think like, oh, these guys are way overthinking like a fishing trip or a backpacking trip, you know. But we really do look at it as a sport. Like it's something that we take seriously, we enjoy, we want to improve our skills, our confidence, and our safety when we're up there. And so we just want to give ourselves every advantage that we can and make sure that we're doing it well. One thing that helps with your heart rate and high elevation, Tayson and I have both noticed at different times when we've been at high elevation together, not necessarily on this Highline trip, but on different trips, where you lay down and your heart's racing and you're like, oh, this is kind of weird. Like my heart rate is 85, 95, 100 beats per minute, and I'm just laying down doing nothing. Well, we've learned a lot due to a book called Breathe by an author named James Nestor. We've learned some great breathing techniques that help you to get that under control. And we've both done this. We've discussed it on trail where if we've had the issue of laying down to go to bed and our heart is still racing, we'll do some breathing exercises for
box breathing,
10 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. And then we'll get that heart rate to stabilize and go down, and then it will stay down over the night. We'll check it. And I think that really helps with recovery.
Yeah. The last time I can really remember doing that was on the first night of Highline 2 years ago, like really focusing on that. And that just kind of shows you the amount of effort that first day took out of us doing the 25 miles with the dry section. We were all getting dehydrated. We were all feeling the altitude. And I had to do it to try to get to sleep because my heart was racing, but also just trying to help myself get into a state of better recovery. But yeah, box breathing, you can look that up as a way to try to help with that. But yeah, nasal breathing, trying to breathe through your nose a little bit more can also help.
I think that's a big thing at high altitude is you're breathing while you're hiking. If you're nasal breathing and you're focused on breathing well while you're hiking, you can really save some energy and make your body a lot more efficient, as you're up there.
I've noticed this. This is not scientific, but I've noticed this. If I'm talking a lot while I'm hiking, that typically means that I'm breathing in and out through my mouth. And I personally notice that I seem to need more water or consume more water when I'm breathing through my mouth and talking, which makes sense, right? Your mouth is moist and your body has to keep it moist. Well, if I'm breathing through my mouth all the time, I'm breathing out some of that moisture more rapidly. And again, this is non-scientific, but I swear I have noticed this, that if I'm get through this big long discussion or something after an hour or two, I can get behind on hydration just from that because there's just, versus nasal breathing. So nasal breathing, like your body's really designed to adapt to either dry, humid, like low humidity environments, high humidity environments. The moisture coming out of your nose doesn't need to be as moist as maybe when it comes out of your mouth because it's picking up stuff from your throat and your, or not necessarily throat, your mouth. So there's something to just nasal breathing and box breathing that would be worth looking into. Many people asked on comments when I did the 70 kilometer ultra marathon that I did. I had something on my nose. That's a piece from a brand called Intake that just opens up my nose. I have a pretty closed off nose, and so that just helps me breathe more through my nose, keep my heart rate a little bit lower, but also just keep me potentially from breathing out a little bit less fluid throughout the day. So, when I'm really breathing hard, especially like in some of those efforts, the tendency is to open up your mouth and start to breathe. If you can continue to breathe through your nose, that can help you with heart rate, and it can help you with maybe hydration at a small level. So pretty interesting stuff. We geek out on it. But. There's
a little more scientific evidence in that Breathe book that we both enjoyed.
Yeah.
It's a little fringe kind of information, but I feel like it's helped a ton. I have 4 years of data in my Garmin stuff for a motorcycle race that I do. And after reading that book, there's a drastic improvement in my average heart rate over that 100-mile, 3-hour effort, which is I attribute a lot of that to some weight loss and to the breathing control.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, really cool. Okay. Well, you guys have hung out this long. We've definitely got to talk about some gear, right? One of your guys' favorite topics for sure. I went ahead and printed out my personal gear list. This is something I keep basically a Google Drive folder, and for every trip, I fill out a gear list sheet. I alter things for the trip, and so I've just got this historic data. I definitely advise people to do this. It's a really valuable tool to have. For me, I can go look at Highline from 2021, Highline from 2022, what gear I changed, what my base weights were. And it makes it really easy to pack for the next trip. If we did Highline 2023, I just pull this up and be like, I'm going to tweak these 1 or 2 items, but other than that, I'm good to go. So my base weight for this, and keep in mind, I am a 6'2", 200-pound dude, which typically means I'm using long, wide bags, long, wide pads, tall Varios and Ventises if they're available, and all those things start to add up. And then we've already talked about the temperature ranges we're going into. So my base weight going into this was 11.8 pounds. That to me is a sweet spot. Hovering
That's with
between
some camera gear too.
Well, that didn't include the camera gear.
Okay.
With the camera gear, that was another 0.8 pounds. I wasn't carrying a lot of camera gear this time, but I was about another, let's just call it a pound. So I would have been at 12.8 with the camera gear I was carrying. So that's a sweet spot for me. Between 10 and 12 pounds is a really, really good spot to be in. I would say most of the other guys on the team were probably closer to 10, especially the guys that can get away without like a long, wide pad, long, wide bag. There's some little things. I may have also taken a couple of things that weren't totally focused on weight, but I think that's really common. That's like the reality of what people experience out there, right? So for me, obviously we were testing the prototypes of CS40, which if they're not available right now, it will be within days. We've got a pre-sale going for that CS40 now. It's a phenomenal pack, and we have additional content around that. 40 is one person trekking pole tent. I had a 15-degree long wide top quilt from us. I had our 1/8-inch foam pad. I had our Oblivion sleeping pad as well. Pillow. I had a balaclava with me. And then everything else is pretty standard, looking down the list. Let's just see if there's anything else to call out. Obviously, during the day, you can see what I was wearing: shorts, trail runners, altitude hoodie, those kinds of things. I was taking trekking poles. As far as clothing, I packed. So I take an extra pair of socks. I'll rotate those a lot or use one for sleeping, one for hiking. So I had a pair of darn tough, lightweight hiker socks. I had some leggings. And so we've got some leggings that are coming out this fall called the Highline leggings. Those those are super nice for trips like this, but I had those on the trip. I took a Vario jacket I had a prototype fleece hoodie that I was messing around with. Wool knit gloves, Tusher rain jacket. I had wind pants. So I didn't have rain pants. I actually had wind pants. Didn't end up using those, I think, at all. But they're 2 ounces. You know what I mean? So if it had rained or it did get colder or windy, I could have thrown those on. I had rain mitts. Those are just basically rain shells to go over my gloves if needed. And then I did have leg compression sleeves that I was putting on that you'll see me hiking in pretty much the whole time. Those actually never really were in my pack. They were on my calves the whole time just because I was still having some pain from the ultra I ran the week before. And other than that, headlamp, Garmin InReach Mini 2. I had a 10,000 milliamp battery pack, and that was it, right? So pretty streamlined kit, but what you will notice with that is we had the gear that we needed to be able to hike in rain. So the Tusher and the wind pants, a lot of guys had rain pants. We made sure that we made those changes. A lot of hikers aren't going to bring those things, but we found for a hike like this, it's critical. We feel like it's critical, especially after getting caught in some really bad conditions. The leggings, that's not something we bring on every trip, but those things are like, I don't know, 4 or 5 ounces.
I've been bringing them on almost every trip.
Yeah, they're just worth having.
They weigh so little and they're so nice.
They're so warm for what they are. You put those on. You put on the some wind or rain pants. You get a lot of warmth if you were ever hanging out at camp. But typically, I just like to sleep in those. I skipped over this. I was using our prototypes at that point. Skyline shorts. Now, those will be available this summer. Sometime around June, we'll be trying to release these Skyline shorts. Those are awesome. Those are absolutely awesome when you're doing big mileage like this. Really help with mobility, not getting bound up in pants or other things. So just high mileage trips, absolutely awesome and absolutely awesome to train in. And they're crazy light. We will have them with lined and unlined options. So you can also eliminate things like underwear if you're running on the lined ones or using the lined ones. But anything stand out to you with that as far as things that
Mine was very similar to yours. I was 12.3 for base weight with me carrying 2 battery banks.
Okay.
My watch dies faster than Tayson's because it's not the solar version. So I usually have to charge my watch at dinner if we're doing a 25-mile day. And so I had an extra battery bank. And also I film more with my phone. And Tayson and Derek film with other cameras. So I burn battery more that way. But yeah, very similar. So that put, with 5 days of food and water, my total pack weight looks like it was 24 pounds.
24 pounds?
Yeah. What was your...
Yeah, mine. So I was actually carrying 6 days worth of food.
Oh, I was carrying 6 days too. Brigham was the only one that didn't carry the extra day.
My starting trail weight with water was total pack with food and water about 24 pounds. Yeah. And then obviously you went lighter from there,
and that's big calorie days. Like I think I have a separate tab on my sheet for food that I went through and put in the weights of my different foods one day. And
just have a food bank essentially you can pull from there.
Yeah, so that was like 4,500 calorie food bags per day.
Yeah,
essentially, which was a little over 2 pounds of food per day.
Yeah, I think that there's 2 takeaways here. One, you can tell obviously that even though we're hiking in summer conditions, we had 3-season gear. This is the same kind of kit we would take for lower elevations in October, or say like 8,000 foot elevations or 7,000. It's the same gear essentially. We go in trying to prepare ourselves for all sorts of rain or weather conditions. So really, it's 3-season gear, even though it's in the summer. The other thing I just wanted to note here is think about that 24 pounds. That's a significant starting weight for, say, an ultralight backpacker, which is why, again, we're such big advocates for having framed packs. Again, this is around the time of the CS40 launch, so I'm gonna harp on that for just a second. CS40 has a carbon fiber frame that is almost 24 inches tall, which means that you can get a true load lift off of your shoulders and transfer that weight. Now, some people say, hey, I hike these kind of mileages, but I don't need a framed pack. I use frameless packs. Or maybe you've got a pack that's got an 18-inch frame, or maybe you've got a pack that just doesn't even have load lifters. All of those three things, any one of those things will keep your pack from transferring its weight down to your hips. And that matters when you have a starting weight of 24 pounds. And then you think about, well, that's my starting weight, but what's your weight on day 2, day 3? Well, I'm dropping 2 pounds of food weight, and water fluctuates up and down. So by day 2, maybe you're sitting at 21 to 22 pounds. By day 3, maybe you're getting to 20 pounds, maybe 19. So that's like slowly going down, which means that if I had, let's say, a frameless pack, or a pack that the frame was not being utilized with load lifters, with a tall enough frame to create a angles to create load lift, that essentially means I've just got all that weight resting on my shoulders, almost little to none resting on my hips. And that's very fatiguing, creates a lot of soreness. It's all of these things. The CS40's frame weighs 2 ounces. You can argue maybe that you also have to put in the webbing channel. So there's maybe another ounce in the bag per se. But you're talking about a sip of water here. You're talking about one Cliff Bar, but the ability to actually be comfortable for the first 3 days of this trip. Other people may be like, oh, I'm a super fast hiker, but I want to resupply every 2 to 3 days. That's what we call fast packing personally. Mm-hmm. So if you want a fast pack, that's fast packing, and we've got a whole separate pack for that, which is specifically designed to do that. So we're big advocates for this. Yes, packing 11, 12-pound base weights, especially out here in the West, especially getting into some of the most beautiful country you can possibly imagine, you got to carry food and you got to carry water. And when you start adding those things up on paper, it becomes very advantageous to have a frame in your backpack and be more comfortable. So things to know.
Yeah, I think to add on to that just a little bit, when you're doing a trail like the Highline, it's true backcountry. You get out there and there's no roads that you're going to cross until you get to Chipeta Lake. And so if there's an issue, you've got a 12 to 20 mile hike out off of the trail. So you've got to be carrying the proper amount of food, the proper amount of safety gear. You've got to be, a little overpacked compared to what you hear a lot of thru-hiking pack setups being, where in most thru hikes, at least all the way through the Appalachian Trail, you're, a day away from a road, you're in cell service, and you don't have to pack quite as much food. Yeah. And so you can get away with a lower performance kind of pack. And in our study and experience, there just aren't very many thru-hiking packs that have a long enough frame to make the difference with load lifters, with the support system and the very low weight of the CS40. So we were really happy with that. And 24 pounds. My 24 pounds was also 3 liters of water. I didn't pack 3 liters of water most of the time on that trail because you're so close to water everywhere. So
yeah, that's exactly what I had. Was 3 liters of water built into mine. So if you're interested in a new pack, especially a pack that's up for an adventure like this, go check out the CS40. It's going to be available on pre-sale where you'll be able to get some big discounts. We're talking $60 off plus a water bottle attachment shoulder strap system. So there's some big advantages to taking advantage of the pre-sale. But also just know what we test our gear for is for all conditions. Taking it into conditions like this, proves to us that we're able to apply it on the AT or in any other scenario. Not to harp on the AT. The AT is very difficult. There's just more supply points. in any scenario, we've backpacked in the winter with this piece. We've backpacked in the summer. We've taken it to deserts. We've taken it through slot canyons. We've ground it up against, basically sandstone over and over again. All these kinds of things. So if you want a pack that can really go from A to Z, check out the CS40 and get it on pre-sale pricing. Save yourself some money there. The last thing that we touched on that you just reminded me of was just an exit plan for a hike like this. Really quick, what planning did you put into contingency planning if something went wrong, if someone needed to get off trail, if weather came in and we had to bail?
Yeah. So I'll run through the basics first. I think 4 people is a really safe and efficient group number. If you have less people than that, you have less people to help in case of an emergency. If you have more people than that, you're less efficient. So that's one thing to consider. On top of that, we made sure that we had multiple Garmin inReaches. There is not much cell service on the Uinta Highline. I think I only had it when I was on Kings Peak.
And Lighty Peak was the other one time.
Oh, yeah. Yep. I do remember that. So that's something to consider. So we had I had an inReach, Tayson had one, Brigham had one, and then we had kind of a shared company one. Derek was packing it until Joe peeled off, and we sent it with Joe. If you're going to plan on sending one around, you got to make sure you get the app set up before you get on trail, or else it won't work for the new person you're giving it to.
Doesn't work as well. Yeah, you can still text off of it, but it's a big nuance.
Right. So that was one thing we did to prepare. The other thing we did was we looked at every single day on the trail, and we looked at okay, if someone were to get hurt or sick and have to bail off trail, where do you go and how many miles is that, and what would be the logistics of getting picked up for that? And so essentially each day we looked at these little tertiary, or maybe you call them like a tributary type trail, that would split off of the Highline and then go down the sides of the Uintas, either to the north or to the south, and meet a road or a campground or something like that. And so what we did was I went through and I identified a bailout point for each day, and I got the GPS coordinates of the start and end of that bailout point. And then I put those on a sheet of paper and gave them to everyone to pack with them prior to us going out there.
Or the people that are picking you up.
We sent that same list to our loved ones. I send out the email with that, and then each of us is supposed to give that to our loved ones, so people are in the know of where we're going and what our contingency plans are.
When Joe bailed, do you remember how many miles it was to get down to the lake he went to?
I think it was about 12 and a half miles to get from...
That's fairly common.
Yeah.
That would be on the low end. That's like an opportunistic bailout point would be about 12 miles. Others could be 15 to 18 miles on a bailout plan.
Yeah, day 3. So he bailed on day 2. Day 3 would have been almost a guaranteed 17-mile bailout, no matter which direction you went. Yeah. If you got halfway through Painters, because if you bailed immediately on day 3, you could just go down Gunsight, and that would be 12.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a big part of our planning, was finding bailout points and then publishing those bailout points to everyone on the trail and everyone's emergency contacts off trail.
Yeah. Definitely a big part of that. I mean, just a big it's not like a perfect safety net, but having the ability to message in the backcountry is really important. Garmin inReach, I have the Garmin inReach Mini 2. Absolutely love that piece. It brings a ton of peace of mind, and just as it's way safer to have something like that. So when we needed someone to pick up Joe, we can send a message. When
Joe gets picked up, we can get confirmation that he was picked up, which is a big deal.
Yeah, it all is just so helpful, super nice. And if you hadn't noticed yet, this podcast is sponsored by Outdoor Vitals, and in the Outdoor Vitals membership, you can get Garmin inReach Minis at a discount with some money back on a rebate. So, last pitch, but no, for real, they are crucial. They're a lot of people are like, oh, that's kind of an expense. Da da da. Well, I do the annual plan. It's $11 a month if you do the annual plan for the whole year, and I get more than $11 worth of value. You don't just have to use it while hiking, right? You can leave it in your car for an emergency communicator in your car.
I got picked up on a side
you've
of
had
I-70.
to use it.
Yeah.
You've had to use it when your car crapped out where there was no cell service. And so, you could send it, for me, I can send it with my wife and just be like, okay, you're making this big road trip drive. Now I just know that you can get a hold of me if something did happen where you didn't have service. There's
no
use
international
case.
plans for them. You can take them anywhere in the world.
I took it to Germany just to have. You know what I mean? I didn't end up using it, but it's like this peace of mind if you ever wanted it. So there's a lot of crossover. Everyone that I've around me that has ended up getting one has never regretted it, and they seem to get more use out of it than they thought. It's one of those rare pieces that you buy and you actually get more use out of it usually instead of less use out of it than you were hoping. So they're a great piece. Well, I think this is a great podcast. I think there's a lot of really quality takeaways, whether you're hiking the Uinta Highline Trail or any other high elevation trail, such as the Colorado Trail, John Muir, etc. Any last or final closing thoughts from you, Tyler? I thought this was really good.
Yeah, I don't want to scare anyone away from doing it. I think
were we too doom and gloom?
I think that if you get the chance to go to a place like this, you should do your due diligence to prepare for it, but you should go for it, because when you get up into these mountains, it's like you're in a whole new world. It's so
I thought
beautiful.
I was in Alaska. I pictured Alaska. The first time I went to the Uintas, it felt like I was transported to Alaska, the most wild, rugged, amazing terrain.
Exactly. It's so big. It's humbling. It makes you really realize just the awe and grandeur of the mountains, and it's a fantastic reset mentally and spiritually. It's also just it's something that's big enough that you should prepare for it, and then you're better for doing the training and the exercise to prepare for it. So you're better off in all ways if you go do it. And if you're smart about it, you can have a great time even if you run into crazy weather or whatever. So I just don't want to scare anyone. It's amazing to get up there, and everyone should experience it. You
said something that I feel like is just important to harp on, which is if you get the chance to do a hike like this. Well, for me personally, in my life for a few years, I was waiting for a chance to do something like this instead of making the chance to do something like this. And that's why we are kind of critical on gear, critical on prep, critical on all this stuff, is because in order for us to have the chance to do this, we felt like we needed to make this happen in a 5-day period. Well, that's not common. Most people hiking this trail are taking 7 to 10 days to hike this. Well, we created our own chance essentially to go and do this, our own opportunity to go do this. If you're looking to do the same, hopefully this serves as a guide. We're definitely not trying to be overly critical. If you hike this in 10 days, you may have a better experience than us because you're just 10 more days in some of the most amazing country there is. So we're not doing it the one and only right way. We're just saying this is how we did it, and we created the opportunity to go, and it was phenomenal. So hopefully there was some good value taken out of this. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. If you guys have not yet left a review, please leave a review. We're doing a giveaway right now. So if you want to win a $368 backpack, something like that, which I don't know if that's public yet, but if you want to win a CS40, you can win one by just writing a review on the podcast. So go write us a review. We really appreciate it. It helps the podcast get seen more, and we will enter you in. You have until 7 days after the pre-sale, which I think means that the deadline on this is going to be around May 15th. So go write a review before May 15th, and you'll be entered to win a CS40 backpack. If you pre-order a CS40 backpack, we'll give you some store credit for something else. So leave us a review. If you have any questions, comments, you can drop those on our YouTube channel, or you can email us at liveultralightpodcast@gmail.com. That'll forward into one of us, and we can answer that on the podcast or just directly back to you. So we really appreciate it. Make sure you guys are subscribed, and we'll catch you on a future episode.